Hello, this is Lit with Lloyd. I am your host, Lloyd Russell. And today our guest is Paulette Boudreaux, who has written a fantastic book called Mulberry that you all are going to want to read for sure when we're done here. And I want to just welcome Paulette and thank her for coming on to our podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me, actually.
It's really my pleasure to do this. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get started.
Okay.
Based on your website, it says that Mulberry is your second book,
yes.
And your first book might be in a drawer someplace.
Yes.
However, it also says on the website that maybe you are in the process of working on it to get it published. So tell us about the first book, and then we'll get to the second book.
Okay. Yes. So the first novel that I wrote, the one that I actually finished as a real writer, as a grown-up, because I actually wrote a novel when I was about 13 or so.
Really?
And that one, there's no traces of it anywhere, and no one will ever find any traces of it either. But when I was in graduate school, I actually wrote a novel as my thesis. And I, actually tried to get it published, and it was almost published, and it didn't quite make it. It got rejected, and at one point it actually was, I had a sort of an offer from a publisher, and I worked on it, worked with one of their editors, and worked on it for about 6 months with the editor, and then I spent like another 6 months or so editing it. And then they decided they didn't want it.
Oh, that stinks.
Exactly. So I put it in the bottom of a drawer and kind of gave up on it. And then I went and I wrote Mulberry, actually. And so this one has been sitting, in the bottom of a drawer for a lot of years. And after Mulberry was out, I had two options for what I would do next. I had two ideas that I wanted to write about. And I decided that I would pull that book out of storage and see if I could make it into something that I would be proud of now, and that would have a possibility of getting published. So that's what I'm working on. But because it sat for so long in the drawer, there's a lot that needs to be done. Yeah.
Do you feel like it's coming along well enough that ultimately it's going to be publishable?
I hope so. I'm pouring my heart into it, and hopefully it's going to please somebody somewhere.
Okay, so you said you had two ideas. When you get done editing the first book, will this other idea lead to a third book?
I already have an idea for a third book.
And you're not gonna mess with that though until you get the first one done?
Right. This one that I'm working on right now. Yes, exactly. Okay. So the idea is, because they're very different books, and so I have to live in the space of the book that I'm working on. Whoops. And then I can clear, once the space is cleared, and I can clear my palate, like wine tasters do between wines, right? Clear my palate of the one that I'm working on, then I'll move forward with the other. But I've actually done a little writing on the third book as well.
Oh, wow.
So
that's exciting. Now, for those that don't know, Paulette came to our book club about 5 years ago or thereabouts.
Yes.
And our members loved her book. And I have the proof in front of me from the ratings they gave it. So I'm very excited to have a chance to read the second one that was first, and then the third one that's third.
Right.
Okay, so the first book went in the drawer. Tell us how you went about writing Mulberry, and how long it took, and how you actually got it published.
Okay. Mulberry actually started as a series of short stories. So I had a kind of a memory of, I'll try not to do any spoilers for anybody who has not read the book yet.
Yes.
But there was a classmate that I had in school when I was in elementary school, And various things in my life as an adult, I was thinking about that child and kind of wondering what it was that made her the kind of person that she was. And out of that wondering and trying to answer my own question about that, I wrote a short story called Mulberries, with a plural. And after writing that short story, I realized that there were other children's stories that I wanted to tell from my community, different things that I remembered experiencing and people. And it was all about how do we become the people that we are, right? What are the influences in our childhoods that make us into the type of people we are? So we start off with our own innate personality traits, right? And then various things sort of impact us in various ways. So I started then, writing individual stories about different children, different types of personalities. And at some point I realized that I wasn't enjoying it so much, and it wasn't quite doing what I needed it to as short stories. So I thought about, so how do I make it into a full story? How do I make it into a novel? And the rest is sort of history, really. I figured out a way to link the stories, to create the one narrator who follows along and gets to interact with these different children. And then we get to see these children's stories and their circumstances and so on that made them the kind of people that they are, theoretically anyway. We get to extrapolate a little bit about, a child who experiences this set of circumstances, what kind of person they might grow into based on what we see, their personality as children and the things that are happening around them. So.
Well, as an English teacher, I hope you'll forgive me for saying you did good, because you put this thing together really well. How long did it take to write?
Oh, my goodness. The actual first draft of the novel took about a year. The actual process of getting it published took a whole lot more years, like almost 20. Well, I wrote it and I sent it out, did the usual, kept coming back and coming back.
You sent it to agents? Or
I
did you go direct?
I started off with agents, trying to find agents.
Uh-huh.
And it kept coming back. And so at one point I just put it in a drawer. And then I got involved with teaching, of course. And so it became difficult to try and focus on my own writing while teaching writing as well, full time. And at some point I had a friend who said, you need to do something with your own writing. So I pulled it out of the drawer, revised it, and that time I started sending it to publishers.
Uh-huh.
And I entered it in a publishing contest.
No
and
kidding.
It won it.
Oh.
But that was like 20 years after the original first draft was completed. So
you actually won the publishing contest,
yes.
And that publisher is the one that published it?
Exactly.
Who is the publisher?
Carolina Wren Press. They're now Blair Publishing, but Carolina Wren, and they have various contests. In fact, that was the only way that they were accepting novels, especially for publication. That was the primary way, was through the writing, the contest that they had. And this one, they were looking specifically for, it's the Lee Smith Novel Prize. And they were looking for writers writing about the South or from the South, et cetera, et cetera. And since I am from the South, from Mississippi, and my book is set in Mississippi, I fit right in.
But you wrote the book from the West Coast, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because you moved as a teenager to the Bay Area, correct?
Yes, exactly.
When you started writing, you said, as a short story. Mm-hmm. What made you write about Mississippi, since you were fairly long gone from there?
Okay, and this is going to sound a little strange, but my characters inside my head speak to me with a Southern accent. And so what I think that means, or what I mean by that on a more practical sort of level and a more normal sounding level, is that I think that most of us are really formed by where we grow up. And so there's a way that that the reality of where we come from really sort of shapes the narrative, right, inside of our heads, and in terms of how we think about the world, how we interact with the world, and how we engage with it. And I think in my estimation, even though I've lived in California, I've been here now for almost 30 years, and maybe actually more than that. and I lived on the East Coast for another 15 years because I went to college in Boston. And then I ended up staying after I graduated. I stayed on the East Coast. And so I have a lot of experience with other places, but the internal reality still feels very much Southern. You know, I've learned how to not sound like a Southerner most of the time. And I've learned the cultural realities and so on of California in particular, of New England when I was living there, and I have this combination of things, but the interior reality is still very much a Southerner. And so when I start to think about stories, and when I start to formulate then how will I tell this particular story that I'm thinking about, or what forms and what characters, what place will I use to create the story or to set the story, it's the South. And so, you know, most of my stories really are, even if I'm dealing with, and I like to think that I'm dealing with universal stories, right? Because that's sort of the whole point of it, is right. I'm writing about people. I'm writing about the human experience. And I'm writing about the American experience in particular. But when I think about setting and characters and so on, again, what comes is these characters talking to me with a Southern accent.
Do books 1 and 3 also take place in the South?
Book 1 does. Combination, actually. It's combination East Coast and South.
Okay.
And book 3 is going to be in many places.
Okay.
It's going to be a journey.
Okay. So you're from Mississippi, and Mulberry is about life in Mississippi in the early 60s, correct?
Yes, the novel is set in the early 60s,
okay. Yes. Are any of the experiences from your characters personal?
Some of them are. It's, even though it's a first-person narrative, it's not my story. It's not all of my story, or all of it is not my story.
Yeah.
I'll say it that way. But some of it, yes, there are a few scenes that were, like the one that I was talking about that really sort of sparked the book itself, the first short story. That was a real experience.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think if it would be too much of a reveal if I talk about it. I think it's okay if I say, and for the people who may have already read it, they'll recognize this. You'll recognize it. The scene with the nail polish, if you remember, the little girl sets a ball of nail polish on fire at her mother's house, you know, to use it like a candle or what have you. And the mother gets very upset and very angry, you know, with the child. And the narrator character in my book, that would be me in that scenario. And the little girl who sets the nail polish on fire was a little friend of mine.
Wow.
You know, and that was actually what I was wondering about. I was thinking about that child and wondering, like, why would she do that?
Yeah.
Because it's like not smart and not safe or any of that. And so trying to piece together what was it in that child's reality that made her rebellious enough to do something as provocative as that. Yeah. And then thinking about the mother in that scene and how the mother responded to her. So in a real life situation, how that child's mother responded to her. had a lot to do with why that child was the way she was.
Wow.
At least that was what I figured out as an adult. As a kid in that situation.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh my goodness, what is happening with these people? Because my family was not like that at all.
Did you have to do research, or growing up in Mississippi, you just pulled on experiences from yourself and others that you knew?
I pulled on experience from others. I talked to my mother about stuff, because she also is very much, she grew up in the South as well. And she knew a lot of the history, and she had a lot more of it in store, so to speak, than I did. So I talked to her a lot. And I talked to other family members mostly, people that I knew who grew up in the South and had their own experiences and stories and so on, so I could say, here's my child's memory of how things were with the Woolworths downtown. Is that true? Am I remembering this right?
Yeah.
And she would say yes or no, or here's the piece you don't remember or you don't know or didn't know behind the scenes because the grown-ups were taking care of this or that. But some of it was real.
Wow.
And things like the scene, there's a scene in there with JFK, the day that JFK was assassinated. That was largely real. That was the moment of sitting in an elementary school classroom in a black neighborhood, segregated Mississippi, and all black everything, teachers, principal, janitors, everybody, all the kids were black, and having the principal turn the PA system on so that we heard real time what was being broadcast out of Dallas on the radio, and how the community reacted to it. That was all real out of my own experience.
Wow.
So, and it was very impactful, which was why it was easy to remember in such detail, because it sort of turned my world around. Because until that point, I was just a sort of la 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 kind of kid, a little bit clueless about politics and government and even the real issues behind segregation. Right? Just but that moment, when these grown-ups were suddenly just out of their minds about what to do and all of that, and so all the little details.
Wow. I was in gym class.
Really?
I remember basically running the field or something when I heard it. It's one of those things that we'll always remember where we were.
Yes.
Or something like that. Can you give us just a brief explanation of what the book is about?
Let's see. I'll remember my my elevator pitch, so to speak. Okay.
We know the star of the book is an 11-year-old.
Yes, she's an 11-year-old, and she's part of a family. She's the oldest of 4 children, and the mother goes away to the hospital to take care of a baby that's born, and it's ill, so it has to go back to the hospital, and the mother has to go to be there to take care of it. And she leaves the older children in the care of the father. And the father, who is a World War II vet and has PTSD and is struggling with that, is not really capable completely of taking care of the children. So the mother sort of charges the 11-year-old with trying to keep everybody safe and in order and all of that. And so the 11-year-old takes on that role. And the family then has a real, I don't know, dramatic kind of time.
And she had 2 siblings, didn't she?
Yes, she had 3 younger siblings.
3 that she had to take care of.
3 younger brothers that she had to take care of. So she's 11, and then the others, the youngest one being 2 at the start of the story.
11-year-old. It's hard to even imagine.
Yes.
All right, we're going to take a quick break,
okay,
and we shall be back.
Thank you to the Los Gatos Community Foundation for their continued support of KCAT Public Media. Because of groups like the Los Gatos Community Foundation, KCAT has been able to inspire, educate, entertain, and inform our community through the magic of television and digital media for over 38 years. Thank you.
And we are back with Paulette Boudreaux, author of Mulberry, and hopefully 2 more not that far down the road.
Yes.
Okay. So you moved here when you were 16.
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable telling us what led to the move?
Life in Mississippi as a black family. And it was rough. It was still very rough. And this was in 1970. And so when actually desegregation, although it was supposed to have happened back in the 1950s, it was just reaching my hometown, actually, because of federal mandate, which said, no longer was it okay just to have voluntary desegregation. And so they were forcing the issue. So my family was concerned that schools were going to shut down, and I was about to start 11th grade. And my mother's 2 of her brothers had already moved out here to California, and they had started their own families and all of that. And they sort of conspired together to move us all out here to get away from the chaos that was about to happen. And so to make sure that I would finish school in time. Because my family, I'm the first one in my family to have gone to college. And so my family was really very much engaged with that idea that I would go to college. And so the idea that the schools would shut down, because there were threats of strikes, that the schools would be closed down, or there would be strikes or protests or all kinds of problems. And the family was really concerned about that piece, and education was always really important to them. So I moved out here, or I was moved out here to San Francisco, which was an interesting experience in itself. At San Francisco, if you remember at that time, where it was still at the tail end of the peace and love and all of that. So Haight Street was still closed down at the top up there near the park, and the high school I went to initially was right across from Kezar Stadium.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I grew up in the East Bay.
Okay.
And I went to Cal in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
And I know the Haight-Ashbury and
yes.
all of that stuff. But I can't conceive of what kind of culture shock it was to come from Mississippi
to San Francisco.
For anybody to go to San Francisco at that time. It was crazy.
Yes, it was absolutely insane.
Do you still have family in Mississippi?
Ironically, I have a couple of siblings who've moved back there.
No kidding.
Yeah, in the last, I think one of my brothers and his wife, I think they've been there now for about 15 years. They moved back from Sacramento. And then I have a younger sister who moved back about 10 years ago.
Huh.
And they're sort of ingrained now.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
did, in fact, in 1970, did everything happen that it was predicted would happen? Schools shut down and...
Yes.
And
yes.
And
yeah.
I guess the racism actually amped up with the federal regulations.
Exactly. And there were, there was all of the kind of stuff that you see in the news or saw in the news at the time, and can see in recordings of the news now of people, objecting, standing along the sides of the street as black children were going into the white schools. Because one of the things that happened throughout most of the South, as I understand it, was that the way of dealing with desegregation was to shut down most of the black schools and ship the black kids over into the white neighborhood, rather than vice versa, sending white kids into the black neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And so a lot of black children found themselves in that situation of having to go across town and having to deal with the hatefulness of, folks who didn't want them there, white folks who didn't want them there.
Wow.
And so, and schools were shut down, and a lot of teachers, were out of work, black teachers especially. And just a lot of chaos, with uncertainty and so on. And there's also the creation of what they call them now, like segregation academies, where a lot of the white families quickly moved their children. They created these schools, new schools, and removed their children from the public schools in town and put them in the segregation academies around, and this was all throughout the South, but in Mississippi, in my community.
Wow.
And so things got really, and they're still not great.
Even now.
They're still not
great. But your
great.
brother and sister still decided they'd rather live there.
My brother and his wife, they're actually nurses. And so they're doing a lot of like healthcare kind of work with people. And they're also, they consider themselves like missionaries to a certain extent, and so that's important to them, that they feel like they're making a real contribution.
Absolutely.
To the community there, because there's a lot of need, various kinds of need. And my sister, I think, she moved back there and her grown children followed her. And established their own lives, and grandchildren came along and all that kind of stuff. And so now she's there because her kids are there, her grown kids and her grandchildren and all of that. And she's found work. And so I don't know if she'll stay there for the rest of her time or if she'll eventually come back here. But Mississippi is definitely very different than California.
Yeah. It's.
So.
I don't think that so many of us that were, born and raised in Northern California, we don't appreciate what we had here, what we have and what we had and how we grew up. But listening to your story, I feel bad that you guys went through that and that it continues to happen. That really sucks.
Yeah, well,
I'm really sorry about that.
Yes, well, it's kind of the life in the South, in the American South. And, and as we know, things have gotten really ugly in recent years. Things have come forward again in ways that no one expected, that we would be kind of back where we are in dealing with a lot of these kinds of issues.
What has led to that?
I think probably a change in the larger society, I mean, it's, this sort of walks us a little bit into politics here, but.
That's okay, I mean.
I remember thinking and saying to some friends, actually, here in California, after the election of 2016, that we live in a big Mississippi, that there is a way that the larger culture is more like Mississippi than we all realized until that election happened. And the way that everything has sort of fallen apart in a lot of ways around equality and race relations and so on in the U.S., kind of points to that. That while we had made a lot of progress, or we have made, and that continues to be true, things were not as progressed. We had not come as far as we thought with regards to racial equality and all of the fallout from the inequality and the ways that certain people on both sides of the color line are feeling, I don't know, oppressed perhaps is the right word for it. It's about economics as well, right? that people are feeling kind of disenfranchised in various ways, especially people who don't have a lot, and feel that they stand to lose a lot, or that they can't afford to lose a lot. And so there's sort of an easy emotionality, I guess is a way to say it, that has come forward, in a lot of ways.
Wow.
And so, because I hear from friends and family who are in the South still, that there are more issues that weren't there, or at least had sort of backed away or gone underground or, or whatever a little bit. I hear the same things from people in the area here too. So unfortunately, that there are more tense moments and tense situations that weren't there before.
What the heck?
I know.
I just that's terrible.
Yeah.
Well,
I like to think we're working on it as a society, and in a lot of ways California is leading the way. So.
Well, I think we're in a bit of a bubble here in Northern California.
Yes.
I mean, we of course see what's happening around. A lot of shootings in Oakland, just people driving on the freeway. There's been a bunch of that stuff, and I don't know if that's race related at all. I don't know, but for the most part, we're kind of insulated from it.
Yes.
And you obviously are seeing it and feeling it, and
yes,
and know people close to you that are going through it.
Yes, and even as much of a bubble as we're in, there's still a lot of problems for people of color right here in the Bay Area. So at West Valley there, I worked with a group, a program that was specifically to support disadvantaged students and African American students in particular. And some of the stories that those students brought, the things that they experienced right here, just were startling and very much like anything that would have happened in a small town in Mississippi, in terms of the ways that people responded to them in public spaces, and things like being stopped by police on their way to campus because they're, black student, black male driving and having to prove that he was actually a West Valley student. To pull out an ID and say, here's my student ID.
Wow.
Those kinds of stories. Or students, again, driving in Almaden Valley, and coming home from a job where he's getting off at midnight at some fast food restaurant or whatever. And again, being pulled over and asked to prove that he lived in the neighborhood.
This is not uncommon, you're saying.
Yes, it's not, unfortunately. So it's kind of what a lot of us are used to dealing with, and we have learned through experience and through our parents telling us, here's ways to stay safe. We've learned how to sort of manage these things and still live decent lives for the most part. For the most part.
Okay. I'm going to turn to something a little bit more pleasant.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That is perfectly
I'm not
fine.
trying to turn away from something so important, but I do want you to tell our listeners and viewers now about your teaching experience and what you're doing now with your teaching.
My teaching. I just retired.
Tell us what you taught.
I was in the English department at West Valley, and so I taught all of the different composition levels, right? So freshman comp and sophomore comp. I also taught creative writing because I have my master's degree in creative writing and literature. And I taught some of the American literatures like multicultural American lit and African American lit, etc. So so that's my many years
That's great.
of teaching at the college there.
And you retired recently.
I retired recently. I retired May of 21. So, and I have been, I'm also teaching, and I started this after Mulberry came out. I'm teaching with the university. I'm visiting faculty with the university back in Mississippi, the Mississippi University for Women. And they have a Master of Fine Arts program, a graduate program that is low residency. So the students are not on campus full time. There are several occasions during the academic year that they come on campus for residencies that are about 10 to 14 days. And then otherwise the courses are taught remotely. As you know, the whole world is familiar with now, the Zoom reality.
Yeah.
But it wasn't called Zoom at the time that I first started with them. And so I will continue teaching in the graduate program there. And
that takes you to the college a few times a year?
Occasionally, yes. So far, yeah, it's just been once a year. I would go on campus for, about 2 weeks and teach and, do all the fun stuff that is to do in Mississippi.
And visit your brother and sister.
On a university campus, exactly.
Are they reasonably close to the school?
Not really, not really. They're actually about 4 hours south of where the university is. But there's been other occasions that I've gone to Mississippi Book Festival and so on in Jackson. And Jackson is closer to my hometown. And so I would drive from Jackson down to Laurel, where my family is, to visit and hang out and kind of look at the old stomping grounds, as it were, and see if I can remember anything.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we just have another couple of minutes. Since you have retired, have you established a schedule or a routine for writing?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
I have to, or I would go insane. It's amazing how much a job, work that you're doing sort of sets the schedule for you. I mean, I guess it's not amazing. I just didn't realize just how much of a reality that was until I retired. And so, because when I was working, I had to squeeze my writing in around the edges of, of the teaching and grading papers and all of that. And so once I retired, though, now my days are my own. And so I had to establish a schedule for myself that makes it workable so that I get up and I spend a few hours doing writing. Well, there's morning routine of breakfast and all that kind of stuff. And then I write for a few hours, and then I take a break, and then I do other things around the house, and then I come back to writing, and and sometimes I get up in the middle of the night and I write if it strikes me. Yeah. And there are days that I spend like the whole day just writing, but I have the schedule so that I have at least the block of 4 hours in the morning, from early morning to afternoon. And that needs to be sort of sacrosanct, right? Yep. That it's no matter what. And then if I get to that 1 o'clock in the afternoon and I feel like I want to keep going, I can keep going. And I can just take breaks, go get a cup of tea or some chocolate chip cookies or whatever, and sit back down and just keep writing.
Does your publisher have a first option on the next book?
Oh, they didn't. We had, it was just a one book, the one book deal, because it was the contest. But they have reached out to me, and they're waiting.
Oh, that's
They've
great.
reached out. They are interested in seeing this one that I'm working on when I finish with it. So
now we won't hold you to it, but do you have an approximate time that you think you might be done?
I have had so many deadlines that I've set for myself that I don't want to do that again. But I hope that I will have it ready to actually send to the publisher to have them let me know what they think. I'm hoping in a few months.
Oh, great.
In a few months.
Great.
And then, of course, as you know, it takes some time. It takes another year or two for the actual book to actually come out, if they would even accept it. But we'll see.
Well, if they don't accept it, which would make them dumb,
Thank you.
I imagine that you would shop it elsewhere.
Yes. My
Good.
original idea was that I was going to find an agent because I still don't have one. And I was thinking I would find an agent and let them work with this book that I'm working on now. But since the publisher for Mulberry reached out to me and, kind of made the deal look sweet.
Yeah, good.
I said I would just send it to them and we'll see how it goes.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to end this with a couple of trivia questions, but I got to say that I'm not happy that we ran out of time.
Okay.
Because you are just fascinating.
Thank you.
Okay. The first novel ever written, do you have any sense of the timing for that? I mean, how would anybody know? But it was in the year 1008, and it was called The Tale of the Genji.
Okay.
And written by Murasaki Shikibu. I don't know how to pronounce it. And if anybody knows, they can let me know later that I screwed it up. Okay, so Johann Gutenberg invented movable type in 1440, and the first book that was printed 15 years later was a Latin Bible, which probably shouldn't be that surprising.
Right.
Yeah. Stephen Day published what was called the Freeman's Oath and an almanac in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The very first book published in the colonies, 1639.
Okay.
Yeah, this stuff is so random, but I still find it so darn interesting.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to thank you again. I'm surprised that I wasn't crying during that thing because I felt like it a couple of times. Just such heartfelt stories, such learning about things that I've only read about typically. And again, I'm really sorry that you and your family have had to put up with that crap. Yeah, I'd probably have that edited out that I said that word.
Yes.
But I'm so grateful that you came and did this interview.
Well, thank you.
And really, really appreciate it.
Yes.
So,
well, as I said, I'm grateful to have been invited, actually, and I hope that with my writing, actually, that I do, sort of reveal to people, more details of what life is like, or has been like, or was like, etc. And always, with an idea of hope, giving that sort of optimism that things are improving, things are always changing, and we're evolving as a culture, and I think that's a good thing. And that's why I write, really, is to reach people and to share these stories and to also, as I said, offer hope.
Yeah, good.
Because that's important to me.
That's really a great attitude. Promise me that you'll let me know when the book is going to be published.
Okay.
So I can put the word out everywhere.
I will keep you informed.
Thank you. Okay, that does it for us for this episode. And once again, I thank KCAT for all that they do, for giving us the opportunity to interview such interesting people. So that'll do it for us this time, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, people.
You just heard Lit with Lloyd here on KCAT Radio. Explore all our KCAT original programming at kcat.org/radio.